Welcome everybody. Today we are here to discuss the Ayurvedic art of tongue diagnosis. Your tongue tells a story about your body and about your health, and that's what we're going to learn today. My name is John Immel. I'm the director of Joyful Belly Ayurveda and of our educational programs. Today's talk is included in our Mastering Ayurveda Digestion and Nutrition program. It's included in our Fundamentals of Natural Healing 2-year Ayurveda program. And so if you like what you hear today, consider becoming an Ayurveda student in one of these fantastic programs.
Shape of the tongue. The shape relates most to the constitution of the client. So changes in shape point to chronic conditions. And the shape of the tongue is related to the amount of fluid retention and the strength of circulation. And it also depends on how relaxed your jaw, mouth, and lips are. So normal is no swelling with a medium thickness on the tongue, not too thin, not too wide. A swollen tongue, this is a swollen tongue on the right here, and that's a sign of low Agni, low prana, low strength, because the metabolism or Agni is too weak to circulate the fluids. So that poor circulation, either the tongue's not draining, or the fluids aren't getting, or well, in this case, the fluids are getting to the tongue, so this is a drainage issue, or it could be an inflammation issue. And that's what makes the tongue swollen. If the fluids in the blood are too thick, and that happens with kapha dosha, is aggravated, is that the blood thickens, then it's hard to circulate, and that could be a cause of a swollen tongue.
Swelling on the tongue can also happen due to malnourishment. We've all seen photos of countries who are experiencing a famine, and the children there may have a swollen belly or a swollen tongue. So when you're malnourished, the belly and the tongue will become swollen. This can also happen if there's malabsorption of minerals for one reason or another. The location of swelling also plays an important role. Swelling at the tip can mean a problem with circulation. And also other shapes that we want to think about. A very thick tongue. A very thick tongue can simply be a very muscular tongue. That's a kapha sign, a sign of healthy, good muscle or mamsadhatu. But that thickness is only a healthy sign if it's not due to puffiness or swelling of the tongue. A thin tongue can imply loss of fluids or dryness in the tongue. This could be a loss of volume of the tongue body. And as those fluids leave the tongue becomes thinner and thinner. So thin tongue is a sign of lack of nourishment to the tongue. And that progresses to cracks. So first you have a normal thickness to the tongue, then the tongue starts to get thin, and then you start to see cracks. So variations on a thin tongue, which is really important to consider and remember. If the tongue is thin and red, what that means is that there's a deficiency of fluids that's making the blood more and more concentrated, and therefore the tongue appears red. So that's more vata pushing pitta, or deficiency creating heat. The tongue dries out and becomes red. If the tongue is thin and pale, that implies a lack of blood, or the red part of the blood is deficient. Maybe the person is a little bit anemic or has rakta kashay. So when we're looking at a thin tongue, we're going to also look at the color of the tongue. Red implies that dryness was the original cause, and pale implies that cold or deficiency of rakta, or of the red blood, is the cause. I've talked about this a few times during the call about a contracted, depressed, or tongue, or a deflated root. And in this photo here, you see, if you look in the back of the tongue, that the tongue appears deflated in the back. And that means that the fluids are unable to fill the tongue. This is a sign of low ojas, or depleted strength. In Chinese medicine, it's a sign of loss of essence. And so when we see a client having loss of essence or lack of ojas or strength, that means the client has been weakened significantly in some way. So this deflated back of the tongue, it is related to water element, but we're really thinking about the strength of the client. And just as you notice, it's hard to see in this cutoff here, but we notice the lips are very pale, the tongue is very pale, the tongue is very thin and appears a little floppy. It's not a strong, muscular tongue. And I think all of those signs are communicating to us that there's some weakness in this client, some essential weakness. So that's called a contracted. Sometimes you'll see that the back of the tongue looks contracted. So instead of a depression, you'll see that the tongue is less wide here. Sometimes the tip will look contracted. In fact, here the tip does look a little contracted. You'll notice that the tongue is quite wide here as we move back towards the middle of the tongue, but at the tip, it's a little bit more contracted. And this sign can be more and more pronounced. So a contracted tongue it's called, or a depressed root, or a deflated root. Now let's take a look at this shaped tongue. Notice the differences between this last tongue and this tongue, right? This tongue is very pale and thin. This tongue appears very stiff and engaged, very red. Even there's like a purplish reddish color here, showing some, perhaps even some blood stagnation due to heat. But look at this tip. This tip sort of curls up a little at the end. There's redness at the tip. And you just see all around more exuberance here. Look at even the lipstick is perhaps a sign of the exuberance here, right? Look at the smile. Everything here is showing the exuberance of a long, that comes along with a long tongue and the vigorous heart. So a long, narrow tongue means that heat is strong and that there's vigorous moving blood to the tip of the tongue, and that allows the tip to grow longer. And this is a sign that appears, or a similar sign appears all over the body. When you see a person having long limbs, that means that there's enough heat to move circulation to that limb. But when you see that a person has short limbs, then just the opposite is true. That's why you have short and stocky and long and lean, by the way, right? No one says short and lean, they say short and stocky. And no one says long and stocky, they say long and lean. Because lean blood is thinner blood and it circulates more freely, and that allows the limbs to grow longer. Here we see the tongue growing longer. And so there's also heat here, so there's exuberance, plenty of good circulation. Look at this short tongue. This is the opposite here. Now, a short tongue doesn't just mean poor circulation. A short tongue actually refers more to a lack of engagement of the tongue than actual length. It's not that the tongue is actually short, but the person can't stick their tongue out very far. And there's several things that could cause that. Some of these are really severe neurological conditions that prevents the person from being able to move their tongue. Some of it could be extreme dryness of the tongue, so the tongue loses its elasticity. But more often than not, it's just simple weakness. And here we see a weak tongue. Look at the depression in the root there in the back. So we're just going to assume this is weakness. And look at the way the person's holding their mouth. Compare it to the previous slide here. We see this slide, the tongue is very exuberant. The person is very engaged in sticking out their tongue. And look at the smile here. All the muscles are being used here. And in this one, the person's, even their mouth is not very engaged. It looks like they couldn't smile even if they wanted to. And the dullness in the color of the skin, the dullness in the lips, the dullness in the tongue is all confirming that that this client is just, their blood's not circulating well, that things are stagnant, things are too weak in general. A wide tongue. The tongue may be wide if it's swollen or if it's lax, or it could just be the musculature of the tongue as well. Some people have a naturally wide tongue, but if the tongue is wide because it's swollen or because it's lax, then that's pathological. So here's another example of a pointy tip. We had it a few slides back with that heart tongue. All these long tongues are really showing the good circulation of the blood. Notice the redness at the tip here, but there's some superficial cracks and coating in the back here with even some red spots, it looks like. So this person has some, maybe some degeneration in the intestines and some accumulation of ama in the colon. With some heat, with those red dots being a little bit of a heat sign there. So, but if you have a very pointy tip, and actually sometimes the tip gets even more pointy than this. This is probably, I wouldn't call this a very pointy tip, but if you do have a very pointy tip, then that's a contracted tip. And that, just like with that deflated root or depressed root, it means that in the case of the tip, it's more the heat is drying up the fluids. So that's not so much a sign of lack of ojas when it's in the tip. It's more that the heat is drying up those fluids, and it applies a stronger imbalance of the heart. Maybe some psychological disorders with that too, because the heart is really going to affect a person being restless, overstimulated, and on the other hand, depression. So those are kinds of the emotions that go along with heart. Whereas liver is going to be more about frustration and tension. The heart is more about restlessness or depression. There's a kind of tongue that's called a hammer tip, which is when the tip of the tongue appears a little swollen, but really that's a sign of the sides being drawn in more often than not. So the sides being drawn in is a contraction of the sides, and that's this. And that has the same pathogenesis as cracks on the edges, which is really associated with poor Agni due to dryness. A swollen tip itself, if it's truly that the tip is swollen and it's not just that the sides are drawn in, that could be poor circulation. Remember, the tip is giving you signs regarding circulation. Let's talk about engagement of the tongue. Here we've been talking about shape of the tongue, and we had a swollen tongue. We also looked at a thin tongue. Do we have a picture of a thin tongue here? I think we saw one. Okay, this is just an example of a thin tongue, even though it's not on the slide. So we had that swollen tongue, and there's the swollen tongue. There's the thin tongue, and we see here that this tongue has just a lack of fluids in it, and then the root is also deflated. So this is becoming more advanced. So I want to thank you for your interest in the tongue, and more importantly, your interest in your body, your interest in health and in healing yourself, your communities, your families. That's such a great gift that you can offer to the people that you love. I hope you loved learning about tongue diagnosis. Again, my name is John Immel. And this program is included in our Mastering Ayurveda Digestion and Nutrition program. It's included in our 2-year certification program, The Fundamentals of Natural Healing. So if you like what you heard today, come join us. Take care.